We need to have a very serious, very direct, very uncomfortable conversation about the fallout from the Indiana Fever's loss to the Golden State Valkyries, because the reactions pouring in from every corner of the analytical community are converging on several specific and undeniable points that the organization and the coaching staff cannot continue to sidestep through careful post-game messaging or organizational silence. This is not venting. This is not overreaction from an emotionally invested fan base blowing off steam after a disappointing result. This is a documented, observable, repeating pattern of decision-making that is costing this team games it possesses the talent to win, and the most prominent and most damaging of those decisions involves something so fundamental to building a successful professional basketball program that its absence should prompt serious organizational examination of whether the right person is making these calls. Let's start with where credit is genuinely owed, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging what actually went right before examining what went catastrophically wrong. Raven Johnson was the best player on the Indiana Fever roster in this game. Not the most expensive, not the highest profile, not the player receiving the most prominent positioning in the team's marketing materials or the most minutes in the rotation. The best. She competed with a consistent effort, the basketball intelligence, and the competitive urgency that the rest of this roster needed to match, and demonstrably did not. That is the honest, unvarnished assessment of what this game produced at the individual player level. And the reaction from the fan community following this game was not just acknowledgement of Johnson's performance, it was a pointed and increasingly organized question. Why is Raven Johnson not receiving substantially more playing time alongside Caitlin Clark? If a player is your best performer in a high-stakes game, what is the rotational and philosophical argument for not giving that player a larger role in the games that follow? The answer to that question, under any competent coaching philosophy, is that there is no argument. You ride your hot hands, you recognize which players are delivering, and you give them the opportunity to keep delivering. That is foundational sports coaching wisdom that predates the modern analytics era, and that the numbers only confirm. The specific proposal circulating in the analytical community following this game deserves direct examination, because it is grounded in observable data rather than fan preference. Both Raven Johnson and Kelsey Mitchell are 5 feet 8 inches tall. They occupy the same height profile at the shooting guard position. What separates them in terms of their impact on offensive flow and collective team production is what happens to possessions when the ball reaches them. When the ball reaches Johnson, she processes the situation, considers her teammates, and makes the pass that advances the offense. When the ball reaches Mitchell, and this is the pattern that multiple games have now documented, the possession too frequently terminates in a Mitchell shot attempt, regardless of what the defensive coverage and the offensive situation suggest is the highest percentage decision. The argument being made is straightforward. Give Johnson the opportunity to play alongside Clark at shooting guard and observe what that combination produces. The pairing of a player who passes dynamically with a player who facilitates and creates at an elite level should, by every logical basketball framework, produce better collective offensive outcomes than the current arrangement where the ball enters one player's hands and the offensive creativity that Clark generates on the perimeter is neutralized by a ball-stopping tendency that no amount of coaching instruction has corrected. Now let us address the coaching decision that has generated the most intense and the most legitimate criticism in the aftermath of this game, because it is not the first time this specific failure has occurred this season, and the repetition transforms it from an isolated mistake into a documented behavioral pattern that demands direct organizational response. For the second time this season, Stephani White constructed the final possession in a crucial crunch time situation without putting the basketball in Caitlin Clark's hands for the decisive opportunity. The second time, read that and let its full implications register. The final possession of a competitive game decided in the closing seconds was not executed with Clark as the terminal scoring option. This is not a debatable strategic preference that reasonable basketball minds can discuss from multiple valid perspectives. This is a binary coaching decision with an answer that every competitive framework in professional sports points toward with complete unanimity. When you have a superstar of Clark's caliber, competitive history, and proven clutch performance capability, you put the ball in her hands. At the end of games, no exceptions that are defensible against honest scrutiny, and alternative arrangements that improve your probability of winning the possession. You either believe Caitlin Clark is your franchise player whose competitive identity makes her the correct and obvious selection to take the most important shot of the game, or you do not. There is no coherent middle position. There is no tactical framework that produces a different answer. For a player with Clark's profile and the decision to hand that final possession to someone other, then Clark for the second time this season in a critical game situation is not a coaching eccentricity or a calculated alternative strategy. It is a coaching failure with directly measurable competitive consequences that the record books will document permanently. The fan community's reaction to this specific decision has been intense, unified, and analytically grounded. The criticism directed at White following this game is not the generic frustration of supporters disappointed by a loss. It is specific accountability for a specific decision that the competitive logic of professional basketball cannot justify. Strange substitution patterns throughout the game, timeout decisions that did not match the competitive moments, demanding them, failure to halt opposing runs with the institutional intervention that experienced coaches deploy to protect momentum, and now, twice this season, the decision to not give Clark the ball when the game was on the line. These are not abstract organizational concerns, they are documented decisions with documented consequences. And the organization that employs Stephani, White, has a responsibility to evaluate those decisions against the competitive outcomes they are